According to Cameroon's National Anti-Corruption Commission, the Cameroonian people were essentially defrauded of $67 million in 2021. In CFA francs, Cameroon lost more than 42 billion CFA francs in 2021, an increase of more than 25 billion CFA francs compared to the year 2020. Now, corruption in Cameroon has been described as Cameroon's worst kept secret. Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index for 2021 ranked the country 144 out of 180 countries, with a higher ranking, meaning more perceived corruption. Now, according to reports, as a result of the Commission's conclusions, about 500 people have been fired from their jobs and 37 others have been put in jail. And the parliamentary group has been gathering testimony on cases of forgery, fictitious land titles, bribes to enter prestigious universities, and even extortion of money from patients in some public hospitals as well. Corruption has become pervasive, and it is something that must be dealt with in all sectors of Cameroon's society. Now, going straight into it, my guest today, joining me from Yaoundé in Cameroon, is Njine Elvis Baneh. He's National Communication Secretary for the Popular Action Party of Cameroon. Njine, welcome to Business Edge. $68 million, which is also an increase from the money that was reportedly stolen in 2020. Does this point to the fact that corruption is getting worse in Cameroon, or there's more acknowledgement of it and people are willing to report it now more than before? What do you think?
Well, good morning, madam, and good morning to all the viewers of your prestigious channel and program. I think that like you say, it simply just points to the fact that corruption, or should I say, the regime in Yaoundé here, the regime in Cameroon, that's those who hold the reins of power, they are simply just a breeding ground for corruption. I think that is just what it entails, and every other person, even the lay person in the street, can read the signs and understand them that way. You know, from 1982, when the current president, Mr. Biya took over power, all his speeches have often reminded Cameroonians of the fight against corruption, but like you rightly put it in your own words, it has become the worst kept secret in the country, and it keeps growing on a daily and even, I would say, a yearly basis. So it's rather unfortunate that Cameroon remains one of the most corrupt nations, not only in Africa, but in the world, despite all what we have here as potentials, as talents, and even resources that could make us perhaps the best African country, not only in Africa, but even in the world.
When you look at it, the report is saying that some 500 people have been fired from their positions, 37 others have been jailed because of corruption. Do you think these are finally the steps in the right direction? How else can Cameroon get a handle? What can serve as a deterrent to people who are involved? And these people include government officials, police as well, health, education, finance, road transport, territorial administration sectors as well, that are said to be the most corrupt in Cameroon. How does Cameroon solve this problem?
Now, when you talk about the figures, the number of persons that have been indicted or called up, yes, as far as corruption in Cameroon is concerned, I will, as a Cameroonian, tell you that those figures are too minimal. They are very, very insignificant as to those who are actually involved in these malpractices in the country. Now, talking about how Cameroon can resolve this issue, the first thing I would like to remind you of, madam, is it's not like we lack the institutions in Cameroon. You have CONAC, you have ANIF, you have there are so many institutions in Cameroon that have been put in place to actually fight corruption. But the problem is that we have institutions that do not have powers. We have institutions that are limited. If we go back to the CONAC, for instance, that released its report early this month, you realize that CONAC can only limit itself to identifying, investigating, and announcing that these are people involved in it. But the final person who has the right and the power to perhaps give orders for people to be maybe called to book is the head of state himself. But is he willing to work in that direction? I say no. Because like I say, for 40 years that he has been there, corruption has remained the worst thing that has happened to Cameroonians. But then, like I say, 500 Cameroonians is too minimal as opposed to those who are there. So if you are asking me the question as to what Cameroon needs to do, the very first thing I would tell you is we need to review the powers that are given to the institutions that be. They need to be totally independent to be able to successfully fight corruption. You cannot investigate persons, you identify corrupt individuals, but you have no right to bring them to book. Until you get back to the head of state, who is the general overseer. One person cannot oversee every situation or every sphere in the society. And then when you come back to the top 5 most ministries, for instance, that were indicted by CONAC as being the most corrupt, talking about the Ministry of Interior, Education, Finance, the police corps, and all that. I want to assure you that these are practices that even babies in Cameroon can identify, that these are things that these people do to be able to misappropriate public funds. So at one point in time, it is the lack of the will from the regime that be, because what happens here in Cameroon is that some people are even placed in offices, not because they merit, but because it's a way of compensating them for being loyal to the regime in place. So if Cameroon actually wants to fight corruption, if the regime in place actually wants to fight corruption, first, they have so many persons that they need to, first of all, take out of the place. Secondly, there is Article 66 of the Constitution since 1996 that has not been implemented, that clearly stipulates that for all those who hold posts of responsibility or appointed posts of responsibilities, you must begin by declaring your assets before you take into office. And so when you are leaving office, they also assess you to see what you must have accumulated within your term of office to know if you embezzle or not. But find out why the head of state has never accepted to promulgate that into law, because he himself perhaps would be wanting in the whole situation, because he as head of state is supposed to be the first person to be able to put that into practice. But like I say, 1996 to 2022, Article 66 is still begging to be put into practice. You understand, therefore, that it is just a lack of the will. Cameroonians simply are thinking that the best way that we can actually fight the corruption is to have a change of power. Anyway, that's what the PAP thinks. We need a new blood at the helm of the state. People who can come.
Hello, Njine, can you hear me? All right, unfortunately, I don't have any more time. I wanted to ask you one final question. So what we're going to have to do is find a way to bring you back and continue this conversation, because we also have to look at it. While there's 67 million that is said to have been lost, corruption costs the economy, it costs the people as well. And we need to further look into how corruption has cost Cameroon and Cameroonian people. Njine, Elvis, Baneh, I have to plug the conversation here, but we'll be having you back in the coming week to further expand on this conversation.
Thank you very much, madam.
Fantastic. All right. And I know it's one that many across the continent can also relate to, issues around nepotism, issues around, of course, extortion and bribery from local officials and even those who are meant to administer certain aspects of our economies. We're going to have Njine Elvis back as we expand that conversation. Unfortunately, time is not with us.